Hey guys, it's Elena. Today I wanted to go through how to make a digital watercolor moon in Procreate using digital watercolor brushes. So let's go ahead and get started. So to start out with, let's go ahead and make a new canvas. I'm going to use this folder with a plus on it. And for this canvas, I think let's just go ahead and make it about 8 by 10 inches. So I hit the inches button here, and I'm going to make the width 10 and the height 8. And then the DPI is 300. So let's create that canvas. And so now we're going to create the background, which will be watercolor paper. And for the watercolor, all of the watercolor effects, I will be using my watercolor brush set, which is available for purchase in my shop. And you can see the link on the screen there. You can also use any other watercolors that you might have from any other purchase or any other free watercolor brushes that you might have. So let's go ahead and select first the color palette that comes with the brush set, which is a paper color palette. This palette here called watercolor paper. This comes with the brush set. So selecting that, it comes over into my selected color palette. And as the paper color, because the moon is sort of it's kind of making me think of cold colors, the type of moon that I have in mind. So I'm looking at some of these more grayish, bluish kind of colors. I think I'm gonna try this one down here, which is kind of a cold gray. And so the brushes are here, AJ Amazing Watercolor. So this is the main brush set. There are two other brush sets that come with this. There's the texture brushes, which we may use some of those, and the blenders, which we also may use. The main brush set is called Amazing Watercolor, and all of this comes with the brush set. So the first 6 brushes here are paper brushes. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay down the paper with one of these brushes now that I have my paper color selected. And I think I'm going to go with cold pressed number 2 and see how I like that. So I'm going to put that one in here, and I think that is really a big grain for this size. So I'm going to take the brush size down quite a bit, and the grain goes down with it as well, and start filling that in. So I'm just going to make sure that is all filled in. I've not lifted up my brush at all. And you can kind of go in here and have a look when you turn off the background layer and just make sure that you got everything. So we have our texture color in there. And it is very, very subtle. So I'm not sure if maybe I'd actually like to use a different color or maybe add another color on top of that in a different texture to make it more interesting. So I think I'll do that. I think I'll add another layer. So we're going to call this paper 1. And let's call this paper 2. And sometimes it can be really fun to mix and match different papers on top of each other. So I'm going to go back to my paper layer and choose a darker grayish color. I think I'm actually go with the super dark one here. And I'm going to choose a different paper brush. I'll choose cold press number 1 this time. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to cover the whole page with that. And that one is coming out darker, because the color I chose is darker. So it kind of depends on what you want your paper to look like, if you want it to be a really obvious paper texture or if you want it to be not so obvious. I heard once from a friend that really heavy and dense watercolor paper textures in Procreate are just kind of like a way to not have to focus on what you're actually painting. So I think it can get easy to get caught up in the paper texture and not make it be about the painting itself. So I'm just going to leave this as it is. I'm just going to look and see. I think it's interesting with both paper textures. I'm just going to try that on top. I'm just having a look here. That other paper number 1 really doesn't make a huge difference, to be honest, but I'll keep it there. So now I'm adding a new layer, and the layer is going to be the paint layer. I'll just write that in there. And I'm going to tap the N here, change the blend mode to multiply. And this is what I like to do with watercolors because it looks like the watercolor is seeping into the page when you do that. So as far as colors go, I actually want to choose just kind of an off black color, but I want it to be a cold black. So I'm just gonna move the color wheel around the blue, maybe blue-green. And then I'm taking this dot here and then just bringing it down close to the black. So this is not pure black. If you go to the value tab, you can see that it's not pure black because it would just be zeros here if it was. But it's an almost black, and it's a cold black. So I'm just gonna put it like so close to the bottom, but not. So this is the color that I've come up with here. And I might just keep adjusting that. And to start out with, I'm going to make a circle. Just outline the circle of what the moon is gonna be. And to do that, I will use the directional bloom edger, which is in my watercolor set. There might be some other similar brushes in other watercolor sets, but this is kind of like if you want to add a bloom on the edge of something. So I'm gonna actually use this to make the outline for the moon. And I'll use quick shape as well by not lifting up my pen. So I'll show you that in just a minute how I'm gonna do that. But I'm gonna make sure that this bit here is on the inside. So that is not on the inside. So I'm gonna start going in the other direction like this. That makes it on the inside. I'm gonna make a circle and I'm going to vary my pressure quite a bit because I want there to be some sort of blobby seeping areas and then some that are not. So going in a counterclockwise direction, not really caring whether it's a circle or not, because I will fix that in a minute, but I'm just kind of doing some blobbing by changing my pressure. Okay, so now that's basically a circle and you can see that it popped into an ellipse, but actually I want it to be a perfect circle because it's the moon. So I'm going to touch the screen and then that pops into a perfect circle. However, I'm not happy with it at all, so I'm going to do it again. Let's just go again. And I wasn't happy with it because I felt like it was a bit too blobby, so now I'm going to try a smoother stroke with only a couple of blobs. So doing it again, letting it pop into an ellipse, touching the screen, and then we can size it. We can figure out where we want this size to be, where we want the edges to be. And I think that I'm happy with it like that. So we're gonna leave it like that, but it's not centered. So let's go up to the arrow up here and turn on our snapping. And then we can put this in the middle of the page. When you see this yellow line going in both directions, that means you're centered. Okay, so now that we have that centered, what we want to do is add some texture, some very blobby sort of texture in the middle of this moon. And we don't want to do anything on the outside of it. We want to color inside of the lines. So what we can do with this is to create a mask. And I know that sounds intimidating if you've not worked with masks before, but bear with me, it's not as complicated as it sounds. So what we need to do first is to create a selection. So to create a selection, we're going up to this ribbon tool and we want it on automatic because it's a bit difficult to select from inside the circle because we've already got some texture here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the white space on the outside. So I'm just going to touch my pen on the outside. And you can see up here, I haven't lifted my pen since I first touched it. You can see up here the selection threshold. And when you slide it, the threshold gets higher, which means that it will select more of the gray area than the white. So you can see here that it's selecting a lot of this gray on the outside, which is probably fine, but I'm going to do the selection one more time and just give myself some space to actually move to the right. So once again, ribbon tool, automatic. I'm going to select over here and then I'm moving. You can see there that it changes quite a bit. So I'm just going to have it so that it's filling, it's not selecting the circle like that, but still that it's still selecting a bit more of this edge here. So now the outside is selected and what we actually want to do is select the inside. So what we're going to do down here, there's a button that says invert and that means make it the opposite. So we'll do that, and now we've actually selected the inside of the circle. So we're going to go up here to the paint layer. While this is still selected, tap that and mask. So now you can see that there is a layer mask. There's the black on the outside and the white on the inside. And the white is a place where you can paint, and the black is a place where it's kind of like we've got a paper over the whole thing. That is where the black area is, and you can't color where that paper is, so you can only color on the inside where there's this hole cut out. I hope that makes sense. So let's just test this. I'm gonna go into my watercolor brushes again, and I wanted to select the bright bloom accent to start with as a color to start adding the inside of the moon. And for some reason we have white selected over here again, so I'm just gonna go back to the color we had before by selecting the color picker and then going back to that. I'm not sure how that happened, to be honest. But so we're on the layer mask right now. So we're going to go to the paint layer again, make sure that is selected. And with this bright bloom accent, we're going to start coloring in, and let's try to go outside the lines and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that it's not going outside of the lines, so we're good to go. So I just wanted to add a little bit with this brush, and it can be a bit unpredictable, as you just saw. If you push really hard, you can get a kind of interesting blob. And actually I like that, so I'm going to keep that. But I wanted to have something that was very irregular for this moon texture. I'm just kind of experimenting with the brush and adding some texture. I think this is a fun exercise because when you restrict yourself to just one color and only play with texture, it can get really interesting. So I'm going to select another brush now. I'm the Splash Bloom brush. These are all just different variations on blooms, and a bloom is like if you have watercolor that's kind of seeping outward. I apologize for my voice today. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm trying to soldier through it. Okay, so just adding a bit more texture here. And I kind of want to leave some white areas and some dark areas. Kind of like our moon, but not. This is an alien moon. I think I want to go to a different folder, which is in the same brush set. So it's in the same package. It's the texture, watercolor texture folder. And this one is, these are kind of similar to some of my other brushes where I have a texture that comes out dynamically. So I want to experiment a bit with this. I'm not going to use the dual color versions because I'm working with one color. So that was watercolor texture number 2. Just going to experiment with adding this in some different areas to see how I feel about it. I think I'm going to choose a different one actually. Let's try watercolor texture number 3. So with this, I'm just kind of trying to see if I can add some variation. Just trying out different textures. With these texture brushes, sometimes you just might want to use them a couple times in the same area because they don't always come out the same. So you kind of wanted to have this sort of these lines coming on the sides. That's why I just kind of kept going until I found a texture that I was looking for. So I kind of want, the idea here is that I really want to have the edges be darker than everything else. Okay, I think that is enough of the texture brushes, and I wanted to go to the blending brushes now. These brushes are a little bit different, well, they're a lot different than the other ones because you don't add anything to the canvas. As I've said in other videos, these are blender brushes, so they will only blend what's already on your canvas. So I wanted to select these to kind of start to nudge some of these things around. Let's go ahead and go with the water splash blender. So this is kind of like we're splashing water onto our painting. And I'm just going to kind of drag some of it into the white areas without making those super dark. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Just kind of dragging. You can also do this with the blotter, which might be a bit better for a really smooth texture. So I think we need some splatter. I'm going to take this splatter blender and see what we can do with that. So I think I want to drag it from the lighter area onto the darker area. Whoa, that was quite large. I put a lot of pressure into that, so I'm going to put less pressure into it now. Drag some of that over. And I do really like how that is looking. So I'm going to keep that there. So this is as if I'm splattering water onto the watercolor. You can also do it from the dark area onto the lighter, but I don't actually think I want that. I really like how this is looking. I'm definitely going to keep that. So I'm really liking that splash. Let's go ahead and select something else. I think I want to go back to the watercolor, the main watercolor brush folder, and I want to go back to my directional bloom edger and to darken some of these lines around the edge just a little bit. This is pretty subtle because it's already dark, but I just kind of wanted to just reinforce that darkened edge here, since we've been doing quite a lot with it since we started. Oops, I was going the wrong direction. I'm just going to keep it going counterclockwise. That's definitely looking interesting. I think I would like to add just a couple more blooms that look like this, because I'm really liking how this is looking, and it looks a bit like salt to me. So I wanted to go to my salt brush here, and for this brush we are actually going to change colors to white, and I'm just going to double tap over by the white, and then we've got pure white. So that's a cool thing you can do in Procreate. But I'm just going to take the salt and see what we can do with this. Add a little bit of subtle texture. This is very subtle, but I think the subtleties is really what I love about texture. I just love to add a lot of, so you just have a lot of different things to look at, even though it's all one color. That might be a bit too much salt, so I'm going to undo the last two of those. Maybe one more. Yeah, I think that's fine. So now I'd like to add some other bloom accents with the white, some bigger blooms. So I'm going back to my brush set, and I'm going to choose the bright bloom accent. And this is because this particular brush has the quality that it will stand out on a dark background. So because we've got the white selected. So I think I want to figure out, where do I want to add a large white bloom? I think this here could use something. So I'm just going to experiment with placing the bloom here. I think my brush needs to be a bit smaller. So there we go. Adding a little bloom here. I think maybe a bit more here. I feel like we need something over here still. Maybe let's go back to that dark color and have a look at what else we've got here. I think maybe a light splatter in the dark color over here. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe a bit more of that in some other areas. And I've actually just had the thought that I would like to have that on the outside of this moon as well. But before that, I just want to add one more dark bloom over here. So I'm going to go back to my splash bloom. Just add one more little thing here. Oh, that was a big thing. Let's make the brush smaller. Just add a little interesting bit here. Yeah. And I'm going to go back to my light splatter and do a little bit more splatter here. Okay, so at this point, I think I want to actually add some splatter around it as well on the outside. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to rename that background. And still with our dark color, let us go ahead and add a little bit of splatter. That's a bit too much. I'll make the brush fairly large and just kind of So I think that is it for now. We have a very, very rough looking watercolor moon. And it would be interesting, I think, to maybe add some florals. I feel like I've seen that quite a lot, and I couldn't say whether that trend has originated with a certain person or not. I'm not quite sure, but I know that I've seen moons and flowers quite a lot. So that might be kind of fun to add some flowers, but I think that would be a tutorial for another day. So maybe we will come back to this. If you guys are interested, you can comment below, and then maybe I can come back to this and do some florals on it. But in any case, I hope that you enjoyed this and that it was helpful to you and that you had fun. And I will talk to you next time.